Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Joint Review Board of the City of DeKalb, DeKalb County, Illinois, Central Business District Redevelopment Project Area, September 4, 2018. This is a continuation of a meeting that we had initially on August 7th, 2018. I'm going to ask Jason Michnick from our City of DeKalb staff to call the meeting to order.
Do you mean roll call, Mayor?
To make a roll call, please.
Mr. Hayes?
Present, what do I say?
Sure. Yeah,
Present.
that's fine. Ms. Johnson?
Present.
Ms. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Nicholas?
Here.
Ms. Carpenter?
Here.
And Mr. Hanson? Here. All present?
Just for our information, the meeting is being recorded today, and it would be available on YouTube probably tomorrow or the day after, as we usually post our council meetings on YouTube. There's been a considerable interest on the part of this particular meeting, so we felt it would be appropriate to record today's meeting. A couple of comments. I'd like to make a couple of comments prior to our discussion. I would also like to let folks know that any comments that any folks would like to have from the audience, we do have a public comment portion on the agenda. Feel free to fill out a speaker request form in the back of the room, give it to somebody over here, Jason Michnick, and we'll make sure that you get on in the order in which those are given. Also, it has been requested by Jennifer Jeep Johnson, our representative of the DeKalb Township, that we have the dais set up pretty much like this so that the discussion primarily will be centered and as we tape this with those members of the Joint Review Board. Is that correct, Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Just a point of order. I noticed public comments are at the end, which would be after deliberations and votes, so it would seem to me more welcoming to let the public talk before our deliberations.
You know, you and I ought to be joined at the hip, because that's exactly what we do at City Council meeting. We have public comment before we discuss, so that we have a feeling on what the public is saying. So absolutely, we'll juxtapose those two items on the agenda. Now, having said that, I'd like to make a few comments, and these comments are going to be all about teamwork, transparency, candor, and honesty. My opening comments today have been pretty much copied, and each and every member of the Joint Review Board has a copy of that. So while I'd like you to listen to me, and while I think it would probably be in the best spirit of this meeting that the meeting is recorded, that I make my comments, and you'll see why I'm making these opening comments. This city has worked over the past several years to implement the fund exciting, transformative projects using the TIF district. Based on the positive momentum, we desire to create TIF 3, and we want it to enable continuing redevelopment in the city of DeKalb. Based on comments from the school district and other taxing districts, TIF 3 was prepared as a focused TIF district covering a small area within the city's central business district. Now, during the course of conversations regarding TIF 3, the city has received inquiries regarding past use of TIF funding to cover administrative expenses. That discussion has distracted from the current conversation regarding the importance of TIF 3. In order to address these concerns, I initially, about a week ago, reached out and had a meeting with Jason Michnick and JoEllen Charlton from our community development staff the two folks most involved with our TIF, with Dean Frieders and with our interim city manager, Molly Talkington. Also, in order to address those concerns, I reached out to School Board President Victoria Newport and expressed to her my viewpoint on TIF 1 and TIF 2, along with a proposal that will be presented to our city council for approval. I was pretty explicit when we met in the back in the conference room. Rather than engaging in conflict and argument over the actions of various taxing districts over the past 20 years, I asked our staff to develop a proposal that would level this playing field and eliminate any conflict. At the next city council meeting, I will be asking council to approve a surplus payment from TIF 2 that over the fiscal year and the next fiscal year will result in the payment of over $11 million to the taxing districts from fund balance in TIF 1 and 2. This is a very large sum of money, equals the total amount spent by the city on administrative costs over the past 20 years. Rather than defending the expenditure or engaging in conflict, I want the taxing districts to have an opportunity to move forward collaboratively. This meeting is about the creation of TIF 3. At our last meeting, the discussion that occurred was primarily between attorneys. At this meeting, at the request of JRB member Jennifer Johnson, we've reorganized the seating to emphasize that the discussion is intended to be among the JRB. Our city attorney is present to answer legal questions that arise. Our community development director and economic development planner are also present to address questions that relate to the eligibility study. But the primary focus of this meeting is discussion among those of us at the dais here. I asked our city attorney to explain to me, as the mayor of the city of DeKalb, what the purpose of the JRB is. He provided me with the following explanation from the TIF Act. Number one, the JRB will review the public record, planning documents, and proposed ordinances approving the development. The JRB shall review proposed amendments to the redevelopment plan or additions of parcels of property to the redevelopment project area. The Joint Review Board will base its recommendation to approve or disapprove the TIF district on the basis of the district satisfying the statutory eligibility requirements. And the Joint Review Board shall issue a written report describing why the redevelopment plan meets or fails to meet statutory requirements. I explain my perspective on TIF 1 and 2 because it's my intention to create a circumstance where the taxing districts can get beyond concerns that they have about past use of TIF. The JRB needs to get to work on focusing on TIF 3. Now, relative to TIF 3, and after discussion by this Joint Review Board, I will ask the board to pass a positive recommendation. As components of that recommendation, I'll ask the board to consider the following conditions. First, that the city include restrictions in the TIF approval documents that require the preparation and circulation of a detailed, itemized disclosure of any administrative costs incurred during the life of the TIF. Secondly, that the city of DeKalb will include restrictions indicating that TIF funding will not be used for standalone infrastructure projects such as street resurfacing or utility replacement, unless that work obviously is directly related to the redevelopment project. And third, that the city commit to declare as surplus any TIF balance in TIF 3 in excess of $10 million that has not been allocated to a specific project. Now, these conditions are intended to address concerns that have been voiced and to ensure that TIF 3 can be used to support transformative projects in the Central Business District. Again, as I mentioned from the get-go, this is about teamwork, transparency, candor, and honesty, and I'm looking forward to having each and every member of our taxing districts to follow that hope and that accord. With that, unless there's any other information that I need to get going, we're going to have public comment, after which we'll have discussion, deliberation, and recommendation. Does that sound fair enough? Okay. Robert Goring.
Hello, my name is Robert Goring. I live downtown
I do.
in the
Yes.
big building right behind us. And I just wanted to state a couple things relevant to TIF 3. First of all, I wanted to comment and congratulate everybody on the very surgical boundaries of this TIF district. It's very well suited for downtown. And the money won't be spent like the other TIF districts in many wide varieties and places if you look at the maps. So I think it's going to be a really ultra-focused resource allocation. I think this is important because, as we stated in the last meetings, from what I understand, this is the only tool available using TIF money to help certain economic development in blighted areas, which I don't think downtown is blighted because it's been abandoned or neglected. The blight that I see is the increased allocations of resources required to keep up these historic buildings, and with the increased burdens of property taxes, and as well as all economic expenses, it's becoming more and more difficult to maintain these historic buildings. And basically because property taxes have eaten up the budgets that you would have for maintenance, regular maintenance to your buildings. And this is because I think of economic pressures, which we all feel, including the city in its own budgets, and all our private budgets as it relates to downtown. As real estate taxes continue to climb, this pressure will increase. Now, therefore, this is a great opportunity for downtown because these historic buildings, if the city doesn't have a private-public partnership, I don't know if the maintenance budgets will be there, and eventually we'll have more and more problems with these structures. Banks will not loan on these buildings. We don't owe any money on our building, and it's impossible to get money even with that. You cannot get money from a bank on these downtown buildings. We spend a great deal of money on investing in maintenance. In fact, we just passed our inspection on the third floor and fourth floor of our buildings under the Commercial Inspection Act, and we had no violations whatsoever. However, if we were to sell that building or continue in the future, I don't see any way around not having some kind of support, i.e. this TIF district. Because I don't think the people in this town have neglected downtown to make it blighted. I just think that economic circumstances force that. If this is the only tool, I would fully support that because I think the options are like this. We have a very historic building over there. If you don't save those buildings, the very few that are left, and there's many that went down, the post office, you know, I could go on and on, but if you don't support those buildings, what will happen is we'll have a continuous evolution of buildings like the Otto's building and that concept, because the owners will not be able to maintain, they'll deteriorate, and then we'll have these beautiful, wonderful, historic structures torn down. We'll lose the classic nature of our architecture downtown, and you know, something will be placed in its place. And I'm not cutting down the Cornerstone property, but it's certainly not an historic-looking structure. I think it's a great thing for downtown, and I supported it. But I think if we don't start supporting these old structures, it'll just be one Geneva or Chicago. So in that regard, irrespective of the McCabe's building, I fully support this TIF district because I think it's the only way we have left to save the truly historic nature of downtown. And we just went through a beautiful Corn Fest. And if everything gets torn down, you know, it's certainly gonna affect our perception of the community and how other people view it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Goring. Glenn Goring.
Well, first of all, thank you all for taking time out of your day to support this wonderful project. Of course, that's my brother Bob. There's a few people that know me. We bought the McKay building in 1976, so that's 40-plus years ago. I really never thought I would currently be talking about it, but I have to really talk about why we're here. This is not just about economic development. Some of you people have been here a long time. This is about what's happened to downtown DeKalb. That's why you've put together a wonderful program to support downtown DeKalb. If you've been around as long as I have, you can remember when you could do all your shopping in downtown DeKalb. You could cover all your needs and never leave the downtown area. It was actually thriving. It could be there again, but it does need some economic support. As my brother said, the cost, just like for the city, the cost for running these buildings continue to go up. There's something really neat about the history about the McCabe's property that many of you may not even know about. The East Building, because the city did a wonderful marquee that was going to go on the East Building about 5 years ago about the history of the East Building. The East Building was the original blacksmith shop. It was Phineas Vaughn's blacksmith shop. If you walk by downtown, you will see a horseshoe in the concrete. If you visit his gravesite, his anvil is buried next to his tombstone above the ground. That was the actual location where they handmade the original barbed wire. Now that's serious history. If you take the time to study the McCabe's property, the history is incredible. It goes back to the 1890s. Our building is well maintained. We just finished the final inspection, and I'll be honest with you, the people from the city that came out were delightfully surprised at the wonderful work my brother and I have done to support downtown and the downtown development. I contest, and I don't want it to sound like it's only about my brother and myself. You know, we've been in DeKalb a long time. We've seen the highs and the lows of what happens to any community. Right now, there's a lot of wonderful things going on in downtown DeKalb. It's a privilege to walk from one end to the other. This program, if we are going to continue the growth of our community, is absolutely necessary, because you have to think about the people that own the property. We have the utilities, we have the overhead, the upkeep, we have the insurances, we have the real estate taxes, the list goes on and on. As a matter of fact, as an owner, we make less money than everyone else we service. And if you own some real estate, you're probably well aware of what I'm talking about. To make this town better and to grow, we need to support this downtown area. I will personally invite anyone in this room to come and take a tour of our facility, because it is so historically significant. Honestly, it still gives me goosebumps when I walk into it. And I appreciate your time. This is very important for our community and for our town. I hope you give it deep consideration of the benefit it will have for DeKalb, Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Bessie Cranapple, our former mayor.
Greetings, everybody.
Hi.
I'm glad that you have changed the format, and I'm glad that this is being recorded and all of that. That's good. That's part of the whole transparency thing that the mayor wants to do. I have some questions. Did the JRB members have an opportunity to review what it is that has been presented? That was quite, I know I send you very long notes, Mayor. That was quite a list that you spoke of previously here, the three points that you made. Have all of the members had an opportunity to look at all of the details of what the mayor has listed, and have the members had an opportunity to discuss with each other? That's quite a lot to swallow in one breath. Did the members also have an opportunity to speak to the people that they represent, which is your respective boards? Because they're ultimately the ones that kind of more or less direct you to do what you need to do. So have they had time to digest and ponder all of these questions? Will the JRB, as things go along, as things progress, and this has been one of my bugaboos, will the JRB commit to meeting on a regular basis? These intermittent meetings just won't do, as I think we've realized that. You need to meet on a regular basis so that you know and can, feel the pulse of the community and exchange information and ideas. And this is something that the city really, really needs to push. The other TIF districts and the other TIF districts, we still need some information. Even though you're discussing TIF 3, there's still a glaring void out there as far as what the impact of TIF has been to date, both the positive impact and the negative impact of TIF. And I'm thinking more or less specifically of budgetary concerns and administrative costs over the past few years. How has that impacted the positive and the negative of TIF as a whole? Historical, you don't have to sell me on historical. If anything, we have not taken care of that in the last few years. As I know, staff, you had all that trouble with the brick streets and some of the, you can see some of the pushback in the community that is very, very concerned about its historical facilities. But we also need to look at the sustainability of whatever it is that we create within the TIF district. It's nice to put your money into a particular project, but how clearly and how meticulously have we looked at as to how it will be sustained over the years? In short, how will a new TIF district benefit the entire community? That is something that you really, really need to look at. And I think that's the ultimate goal, and the ultimate goal is to work together. I cannot emphasize that enough. You need to talk with each other on a continual basis. Your respective people that you represent need to talk with each other on a continual basis so that you can direct your staffs appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Bessie. This is my second joint review board meeting. I think that's an interesting question, whether or not the JRB, when I look at its bylawed purposes, how often we should meet. So at some point, maybe we'll have a discussion of that.
Mayor, I didn't sign up, but I was hoping you could recognize me and add me to the list.
Yes, okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Just identify yourself, Gino.
Sure, as you know, my name is Gino Galuzzo. I'm an attorney. I represent the school board. And I was at the last meeting. I didn't realize we're changing the structure without having a vote, so I can understand that. So I'm just speaking here as part of this public comment. I think you're right with regard to the more disclosure needed. I think part of the process we've been working on since the last meeting was to identify the type of disclosure and process necessary to have clear transparency. Because without that, we'll just continue down the cycle of the past. And I know you referenced the past as being something that happened long ago before this administration. But some of the acts that we determined with the administrative funds or whatever ever continued just in recent year, last year, this year, and was going to continue until we brought these to light. So we're concerned about, obviously, the process or the restrictions you're putting into place for TIF 3, and also ensuring that we have that type of transparency and discussion going forward so that things are identified as we move forward. For example, one of the other JRB members pointed out to me last Monday that I think on the agenda, and I don't know if it got passed, was use of $30,000 from TIF 2 for City Hall Finance Department renovations. Again, it'd be nice to have a little more open discussion on that, given the history on what's happened, as you had indicated, the $11.2 million in transfers to the city's general funds over the years of the TIF. Those are dollars that, from what I'm hearing today, could have been well spent if they were into TIF, but they weren't. And now we're trying to all move forward. I agree we should all try to move forward, but we shouldn't do so with just kind of sweeping under the rug what has actually happened and trying to put a process into place, go forward, that addresses some of those concerns. So I understand you want to continue to move forward, but and I don't want to stand in the way of TIF 3, and I made that clear the last time, or the school district doesn't, which is why we had recommended since the last meeting, even at the last meeting, which is give us some time to work through some of these agreements that you want to have move forward. Your TIF is not under any type of timeline that it has to be created today. In speaking to Dean, it sounds like you want the TIF created prior to the end of the year, because if there isn't an appropriate agreement, he said, you may not distribute the $11 million in surplus. I'm hearing you say you're going to bring that to vote next week, one way or the other. So I guess I'd like to get clarification on that, without regard to whether there's some sort of an agreement or not, you're going to distribute dollars out of the surplus. And secondly, as I indicated last time, if you pause the TIF, you can start the TIF process again within 45 or 60 days past the TIF. We know it needs to be passed prior to March or April. It'd give us an opportunity to work through many of the things, including the offer we received at 4 o'clock on Friday, so that we could take an approach that's methodical and all of our taxing bodies could consider it. They each have different meetings with different meeting schedules. I feel that kind of pushing it through now in a rush basis doesn't give us all the ability to discuss it, contemplate an agreement that works well for everybody and moves forward in that open, transparent manner in which you're kind of portraying that you want to move forward and discuss. So in that light, I just want you to reconsider moving forward with the TIF, because again, you have plenty of time to either start it up again and get it created by this year's end, or start it up again and get it created before your March assessment roll is done. And I really didn't see the need to rush it through today. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speaker request forms. Mr. Capitan. Steve Capitan.
All right, I have a job that I have to attend, but I wasn't able to make the beginning. Not being retired or having my own business, my hours are not as flexible. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. Just my basic feeling about the appropriate or the most appropriate structure of TIF is to identify a specific project, narrowly defined goals, and a limited geographic area, and therefore a more limited time frame. When the city or any city creates a large geographic TIF district with vague goals, without a specific project directly in mind at the time of its creation, what tends to happen is that the TIF fund can end up being used for less than the most cost-effective purposes. One could even say that it could end up like a slush fund, because the money is burning a hole in the city's pocket, can only be used for limited specific purposes, can't be used for general expenditures of the city that are which the public sees as the priority. And it creates that kind of conflict and concern. So the best example that the city has demonstrated in terms of a limited TIF district was the County Home Project. And in that project, that's where the Old Navy is, Is that still there? The, anyway, that shopping center over there, Michael's and Pier 1 and so forth, the city had a limited TIF district, invested the money in creating a clean site. Once that was paid off, the TIF district was ended, and it did not last the statutory maximum of 23 years. One thing about the statutory maximum, TIF districts are only supposed to last as long as it takes to achieve the goals and pay off whatever bonds are issued in trying to achieve those goals. What ends up happening is that the city staff, the city council ends up referring to TIFs, well, they last 23 years. Well, no, that's not true. TIF's statutory maximum is 23 years. They're only supposed to last as long as it takes to achieve the goals. So you see my point about the vague goals that create the never-ending TIF that bumps up against the statutory maximum. So those are my feelings in general about approaching a new TIF. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, with that, we'll turn it over to discussion by our Joint Review Board. I think it would be appropriate to get the item that we're here for on the table. I would entertain a motion to move forward with TIF 3.
I would like to make a motion prior to that. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I would think you could, sure.
By majority vote of those present and voting, and having reviewed the public record, the planning documents, and the proposed ordinances approving the redevelopment plan and project, that the project area fails to meet the requirements, eligibility criteria, and the objectives of the Tax Increment Redevelopment Act, in that the plan area is inclusive of parcels which have already been subject to the redevelopment plan and project, have been assisted to the maximum extent by such plan and project, and are therefore not blighted. Furthermore, the proposed redevelopment plan and project fail to meet the objectives of the Act because the proposal, as currently constituted, will not eradicate blighted conditions and therefore does not promote, protect the health and safety, morals, and welfare of the public. In addition, the city has demonstrated a failure to follow the requirements of the Act in its management of the collected increment from the other plans and projects to such an extent that it is unlikely that this plan and project will serve to promote the welfare of the public as it's presently structured. The assembled taxing bodies are willing to undertake further discussion and negotiation regarding an amended plan and project if the plan and project area is amended to actually deal with blighted properties, and if appropriate assurances regarding the use of TIF revenues solely for economic development purposes in keeping with the Act can be put in place.
Are you making that a motion, Cindy?
Yes.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second to that motion?
I second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that?
I would,
Yes.
if I might, I think the point that I'm gathering out of that motion is the inclusion of already developed properties. I just fail to understand how that is accomplishing the mission of TIF, of redeveloping. I understand it's being done because that will have an influx of money into the TIF, but that isn't how TIF is structured. TIF should take blighted properties and from those increases pay off the debt to redevelop them. So I think that's a key component. I also think, if I understood the proposal right, and I did attend some meetings on this, is that the porting of funds from TIF 1 and TIF 2 into TIF 3 is not appropriate. And I think that's what enters in this whole discussion of what happened in TIF 1 and TIF 2.
Mm-hmm.
If you did not do the porting, then it's easier to remove that from the discussion, as you had suggested in your narrative earlier. But those are two concerns I would have, and why I do support that motion.
Any further discussion? Mr. Nicholas?
Yeah, we sat here, what was it, a month ago? And I thought the members of the JRB were of a similar mind that we wanted to have working sessions together, all of us, to try to reach an area of compromise that would allow us to address some issues that at the time were rather vague to me and I'm representing Kishwaukee College here. There were some revelations that day and then some subsequent days afterward about money that might have been claimed for administrative purposes, maybe arguably could have been put into a surplus distribution, and then there was also what Gary just brought up about the possibility there were a couple of parcels that were within the proposed plan that might be discussed in a little more depth, so that there might be some consideration of removing a few parcels without throwing out the whole plan, which is a detailed plan. And as I said a month ago, and in behalf of the college, and I say now, I think on the whole, the proposed plan area does meet the statutory blighting characteristics. And I agree with Glenn or Bob, one or the other, probably Glenn said that we don't want to use that word, but in the statute, that's the way that you describe what the criteria are. So I guess I'm dismayed if after a month the best we can do here in 5 minutes is throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm very disappointed. Yeah. I don't know why we can't sit down and work this out. It sounds like there's been some movement. It sounds like there has been some discussion. I have, on behalf of Kish, I haven't been invited to any these meetings, and I just trusted that people of goodwill would work out something with respect to the distribution of the surplus from 1 and 2, and then whatever was going to happen in 3. I think that's still the case. I think we can work that out. But it sounds like we're going to have a train wreck here today. That's just disappointing to me. I have to say, I wish there was another way around this. I could use some guidance, I suppose, from any of the lawyers present. At this point, and maybe I'll ask Dean, here we are, September 4th. I understand that we're up against the deadline for the continuation of the TIF, that some decision has to be made by the JRB at this point, or else the plan is moving forward, or what is the official, what is the statutory guidance on this?
Please.
So from the TIF Act, it indicates that the Joint Review Board is to review the public record planning documents and proposed ordinances approving the redevelopment plan and project area for the TIF, for TIF 3. Proposed amendments to the redevelopment plan or additions of parcels of property to the redevelopment project area to be adopted, again, TIF 3. As a part of the deliberations, you may hold additional hearings. The board's recommendation is advisory and non-binding. The recommendation shall be adopted by a majority of the board members present and voting. The recommendation shall be submitted to the municipality within 30 days after convening of the board. That's the 30-day timeline. Failure of the board to submit its report on a timely basis shall not be cause to delay the public hearing or any other step in the process of designating or amending the TIF district, but shall be deemed to constitute approval by the Joint Review Board. So the 30-day timeline is in the TIF Act.
Okay, so let's take it a piece at a time. There's supposed to be a JRB report, so we don't have a report. We're going to have a vote, possibly, maybe not, but that's no report. So who writes the JRB report?
In the case of many joint review boards, there's not much in the way of a formal document that's generated beyond the motion and recommendation of the joint review board and the minutes of their meetings.
Okay, so the motion on the table presently would, if approved, pass as the JRB report.
Yes, that would be the record of the joint review board's action, yes.
Okay.
What was the role of the Friedman Group? I thought they stood here a month ago, as you suggested, Bill, and gave us a a statutory okay, if you will, to this TIF 3 proposal? Is that not a accurate assessment of what happened?
The report from SB Friedman analyzed all of the parcels of property within proposed TIF 3 on an individual and collective basis and came to their professional recommendation that the properties did meet all of the eligibility requirements of the TIF Act. So their report is their certification that the TIF, as proposed, does meet the statutory requirements.
I'm sorry. Did you? I recall at I think it was the June 27th public information meeting that was held. I believe this question about the two parcels was raised by someone in the audience, and my recollection was that Jason explained why those two properties were included, and the purpose, obviously was not so that they can receive new monies from the TIF, but rather that they would, the newly generated EAV would essentially seed the projects that would follow in the remaining, whatever projects would come forward for the other parcels that were included in the TIF. Is my recollection on that correct?
Yes, that is what I stated at that public meeting, and that was the intent and strategy that the city had taken with including those two parcels.
So am I also correct in saying that if those two parcels were to be removed, that it would fundamentally change the funding mechanism that's been contemplated by the city for how the strategy would move forward for those new projects that have yet to be determined?
I think it would have an impact on the increment that would be generated and the city's ability to incentivize projects in the near future. Also similar to the porting that we had included in our strategy and the conversations that we've had with the various taxing districts on what our approach to the creation of the new TIF district is. It does not mean that we wouldn't be able to move forward with projects. It does impact the city's strategy moving forward and how we could incentivize projects.
Thank you. So simply removing those two parcels isn't just an easy fix to what the greater discussion is that's being at. I understand that some of the questions behind how this TIF 3 is being contemplated, I think those are reasonable questions, and I think that nobody has a problem with, and I agree that our constituents, as well as interested parties, expect us, have reached out to us directly and asked that we, in a transparent and open way, explain and ask the questions that they themselves may have but don't have an opportunity to discuss. So along those lines, I'm in complete agreement with you. These conversations should take place. I too share a little disappointment that what we're trying, my impression of the motion that was just made is that we're once again preempting that conversation from taking place by dismissing the meeting. So I'm hoping that we can find an alternative way to continue forward with the conversations that, again, I personally have been reached out to, and I assume you all have as well, people asking for us to have these conversations so that they can hear and participate in them. I'm hoping that we can find a way to do that.
And the intent of the motion was to start those discussions.
What was that, Cindy?
The intent of the motion was to start those discussions here at this JRB, so we're not just rubber stamping something, that we're really thinking about what we are doing. And I know that we're supposed to specifically just be looking at this particular TIF, but it's kind of difficult to do that when a lot of the properties that are going into this TIF have already been TIFed for 35 years and potentially will be TIFed for, in excess of 50 years if this TIF gets approved. So I think it's important. It's kind of hard to just look at it in isolation. We have to look at it in totality with what has happened in the past. And the reason for the motion was to start those discussions in public so we can really have some honest dialogue.
Mr. Nicholas.
If that is the case, and maybe I misunderstood it, it sounded a little more harsh than that. I fundamentally agree with what you just said. I think we ought to have a round table so we can face each other, and we have an agenda that's very specific to the problems we're trying to solve, and we get to work. I don't see this as a months-long project. I think this is something that is very doable, but we need some data that will stand the test of reasonable people, that we can agree on the data first, and then we can look at what we think needs to be done to amend this plan, if any.
Well, you know, Bill, I take full responsibility on making my comments prior to this joint review board, because a week ago where I saw this going was litigation. And we don't need that. We don't need that in this community. And so I thought what we were having today was, by moving forward with TIF 3, the opportunity to have that discussion. But I respect the motion. We do have a motion on the floor. And I would call for further discussion. Heather.
I'm representing the Park District. I echo a lot of the concerns. The properties that are in the TIF district that have already received TIF money are definitely a concern, and as we've discussed, the use of the TIF money over the past 10 years. The Park District is not opposed to TIFs or TIF 3. However, we've been given this information at a very late time. We've barely had time to talk amongst our own boards and amongst our own groups. We are here today and we have to make a vote today if this process continues. If we're going to be open and continue to discuss, then, as it's kind of been mentioned, maybe something needs to be slowed down so that the taxing districts and the city can discuss this openly.
Tim,
Excuse-
our public member.
Excuse my ignorance, but I'm trying to understand why it's a concern. If there's a brand new building in the TIF district, they're not going to request funds for a brand new building. So why is that a concern if a brand new building is in the district?
I can handle that one.
Thank you.
Because the value of that building will go back to January 1st of 2017. Right, I think that's right. So the increment, the new, whether that building say worth $5 million or $6 million now, all that value goes into the TIF, and none of the taxing bodies will get any money out of that new assessed value. We will still get money out of the value before it was torn down. That's the concern.
I see.
And
Okay, that makes sense.
From my standpoint, 10% of the tax money out of that building is county's tax money that we're putting into, and the school is 60 or 70%. So we have a vested interest, and we've already paid to have that building rebuilt.
And by keeping it in the TIF, then it eliminates its new value.
Yes.
Okay.
JoEllen Charlton, our Community Development Director.
Thank you. I just wanted to address one of the comments made by Jennifer Jeep Johnson, in that the projects in this TIF district were designed to create an ongoing strategy for the city to be able to continue the good progress that we've started. We decided to keep it small. We decided to keep it focused. Early in the process, we were talking about porting funds as a means to create that seed capital. One of the most important things in economic development is to keep the process going and keep the momentum going. We have a lot of development opportunities that we have been talking to and working with over the past year and a half as we've brought the first couple of projects on. Some of those may now be at jeopardy because of the changing ways in which we're talking about implementing TIF. So I am a little bit concerned about, again, changing things at this late hour. A lot of the strategies that we have discussed with you in the districts have been part of public meetings with the council back in January and I think May or June of this year as well. So it's not new information. We have been communicating both at the council meetings and with various taxing bodies throughout the year about what our strategy was. So moving forward, if we're taking away the porting and we're taking away some of the other funding that we're talking about with pulling buildings out that were part of the strategy to build a fund so that we could support the investment in the area, we're going to whittle this district down to something that is meaningless in terms of us being able to provide economic support. And if we can't keep that momentum going in the next couple of years, that momentum will die off and we won't have investment. And at that point, none of the districts benefit, because if we can't generate new EAV in our community to lower everybody's tax bill, ultimately that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about a project and a mechanism to put in place that will help this community stimulate reinvestment. And that's why we put this together the way that we did. And, you know, again, we're talking about not doing the porting now. We're just talking about giving that money back to all of the taxing districts so that we can establish a new base and move forward from that point. So if we're going to deviate from that, I am concerned that all of the work that we put into this for the past year will be for naught.
Could I please have Gino come to, can he please speak? Can you have Gino please speak, our attorney?
What was that, Cindy?
Can we have Gino Galuzzo please speak?
I just have a couple of points I just want to point out to hear some of the information that is going on here. A couple things. I think we're all concerned and have a common goal to see new development downtown and new investment, new TIF. So I think that's the plus. I think the other plus is that, to Bill's standpoint, we could slow this down, as I said before, continue the discussion, and not detriment new projects one bit. The properties that are going to be in a new TIF or in an existing TIF today, you can enter into a redevelopment agreement tomorrow, next week. It doesn't hurt them at all. While we're having this discussion on this roundtable, open discussion on what happened and how do we put mechanisms in to continue having transparency go forward. There's a couple, so number one, yes, you can slow it down, but the way to slow it down is really to have the city stop creating the TIF at this point and to restart it anytime in the next 30 to 60 days. They can still get it done by the end of the year. And that's why the motion Cindy made is really to vote it down today at the JRB, which doesn't prevent it from moving forward. Council could still move it forward with the supermajority vote and create the TIF on their own without regard to what the JRB does. It just requires a higher threshold. We would hope that instead the city would slow it down, abandon the process, come back in 30 days after we have our roundtable and start it up again and still have it created by the end of the year. Number two, we're being told that there are some big impacts if we pull out those two buildings. According to Jason and Dean, those two buildings will generate about $350,000 a year. And this question wasn't answered, but are you planning on porting dollars from TIF 1 into the new TIF? Is that still part of the plan? I would imagine it still is, because you said there's not going to be any porting, but I would imagine that's still part of the plan.
That would entirely depend on the projects that come forward and in what time frame. There would still be the opportunity before the end of TIF 1 for us to support projects that would be outside of the new TIF.
Okay, so the opportunity's still there for porting. That's not being given up with the $11.2 million. TIF 1 is expected to create roughly about $17.5 million new, starting with this year's taxes collected and then 4 years after this year. So when you say there, if you carve out those two properties, there's not actual seed money for projects going forward, that's not completely true, which is why Jason was having a difficult time finding his words a moment ago where he said, it will impact us. Well, of course it's impacting you because there's $350,000 left. So there is an impact, but it's not a prohibition because there still is TIF 1 in place. It'll generate $17.5 million that isn't part of the IGA surplus distribution. And that money, as Jason just indicated, if there are projects located, could be ported to TIF 3. So I think, so I think as we're kind of walking through with these things, the important thing to lay out is everybody seems to want to have a discussion. If truly there needs to be discussion take place, and this is what I've been asking since the last time, since we had some initial meetings until I think it was 4 o'clock on Friday, I received kind of the email laying out the current plan, Mayor. The best thing to do is just to kind of table this TIF, not proceed forward with it, and reinitiate it in 30 days. That gives us the time to have this discussion out so we don't have a mess. But I think either way, though, since that hasn't been done today, the JRB has to take a vote today. And if they don't take a vote, their vote is, in essence, to approve, just by not taking a vote. And that's why we prepared the motion today, knowing that we hadn't gotten feedback from the city that they were going to support a slowdown. And we were told no, and we were told you weren't available to meet an hour before this meeting today, so we can express our concerns, why we prepared the motion to vote it down. Thank you. And again, if we vote it down today and it comes back, the amended plan could be without those two parcels and we could vote it through again.
I just want to correct one thing. When did you make the request that you meet with me prior to this meeting?
Probably about 3 hours ago when I last spoke to Dean.
Okay. I did get a a note from, I think, Dean and Molly about an hour before the meeting that you were gonna stop in early.
I was
What-
told that you weren't gonna be available.
And Mayor, if I could jump in briefly.
Yes.
With regard to the requests that have been made to the Joint Review Board, I think going back to your opening comments, there are kind of two things that are being considered here. One is, with respect to the Joint Review Board, it has a narrow statutory mandate with respect to TIF 3 that doesn't encompass many of the other topics that have been under discussion up here. But I think to your point and to the point of many of your counterparts on the Joint Review Board today, those are all topics that are of significant importance that you have indicated the city's commitment to discussing. And if some of the points that you outlined at the outset here, if those are to be action points for the various taxing districts moving forward, they're all things that would require intergovernmental agreements and work and collaboration and discussion and agreement between the taxing districts. I think the fundamental conflict that we're coming down to is, if we look at the purpose of a joint review board with respect to TIF 3, and if we compare that statutory charge with the list of concerns about TIF 1 and TIF 2 and historical practices, there's not direct overlap. So I think perhaps at the last joint review board meeting, there was discussion about working groups, and the challenge we ran into was a concern of not wanting to appear as though we were circumventing the Open Meetings Act. But it really sounds like many of the things you wish to talk about aren't things that are within the purview of the Joint Review Board for TIF 3.
That's
They'd
why I
be-
asked the question in the first place. What is the purpose of the Joint Review Board today? You know.
So the purpose of the Joint Review Board, as we talked about, is a narrow purpose with regard to TIF 3, but there's obviously a need, as you indicated, for agreement between the parties and work with respect to TIF 1 and 2 that would be outside of what this group is entertaining or what this group is statutorily charged with. So I guess my suggestion would be this group can look at TIF 3, this group can make recommendations with regard to TIF 3, but I think based on your comments, it's clear the city is committed to having other discussions that aren't a part of the Joint Review Board that address concerns and allow for the roundtable discussion, allow for frank conversation with regard to everything else that has been under discussion. And that doesn't have to work on the same timeline as the Joint Review Board, and it's not bound by statutory dictates of what's before this body.
Mr. Nicholas.
I don't want us to go in circles, so I'm gonna take a different geometric move here. Just looking at the narrow definition, what the JRB is supposed to do, the second point about possibly proposing amendments to the redevelopment plan or additions of parcels of property. In this case, we're talking about the potential for removal of some parcels, which is what was mentioned in the motion, or was suggested that that's a stumbling point. I think that in itself is a reason to continue this rather than to try to make a vote today. I'm not certain, though. Well, let me back up. I think I'm very confident that everybody sitting at the dais here, everybody in the room here, could have had other things to do today. I'm sure these are all people of goodwill. I don't see any particular cynics or bad persons, bad agents here. So I think we can come to a grand compromise because of what's at stake. More is at stake here than any one district or any one person can claim. So I guess so I have a procedural problem. I think there were two different suggestions made about what the impact of a continuance today is. And Gino, I was listening to what you were saying. If I gather what you said correctly, it looks like we would be facing a supermajority vote by the council if we were to continue today and go to some later. That's your opinion, is that right? Or
Just to clarify, if there's a negative vote out of the JRB, that requires a supermajority of the council to pass it.
yeah.
If there's an affirmative vote of the JRB, then it's just a simple majority of the council. And no action by the JRB today, and if we run through that 30-day period, which
Yeah.
I think would be a couple days from now, if we
Yeah.
don't come out with a vote, is
And
the
do you-
same as an affirmative vote.
And do you agree with that? Dean?
By statute, it's a 3/5 supermajority, which for our council of 8 means 5 of 8. It's functionally the same as a simple majority.
Okay,
So,
okay. But you agree with the deadline that we're facing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's actually the corporate authority, so I don't know if you have 8 council members?
That includes
7 plus the mayor.
the mayor.
Yeah, Jenny?
Just to kind of circle back and maybe explain why I requested to set it up a little bit differently today. I do have concerns that that Mr. Galluzzo, I'm sure you're a phenomenal attorney and you are fiercely, advocating for your client, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. But once again, we're throwing a lot of data at a group of people who has no singular representation, and we're being jockeyed around between what's being presented as interests are of the school district. I don't have my lawyer here present, and when things are thrown out, facts about TIF and the procedural offerings of the TIF Act, all I can do is say, is that true? Is that true? Is that true? And I think that that's less what the intent behind the request that we received was, and more for us to discuss how TIF in general stands to benefit the entire community. We all are here representing individual districts, but for the most part, we're all representing the same people, and they want us to work together, and they want to know that while we are representing, because we're charged to represent a specific unit, it's silly to imagine that my slice is different than somebody else's slice, because what we're all doing is trying to find ways to improve our whole community. So when we get so bogged down in legal procedure and posture, and which is very important, and I think it's of the utmost importance that we know that what we're doing is following the guidelines that we are charged to follow. So that is not, I'm not suggesting that we throw that out the window by any means. But what I am suggesting is that I do find myself, once again, feeling a little flooded with not being entirely certain what question is being asked of me or anybody else, and how to offer an opinion that is representative of what I think the people who voted for me expect me to be able to do. So I don't know, that's why I keep trying to simplify down the question that's being asked of us. And for everybody else who's trying to follow along, I think that would be really helpful for me. Maybe it's just me, but I think, that's important.
Is it true, Mr. Mayor, that the council then would take this up if it was to just move forward? The council would take this up at what point? Next week?
We would have a
Monday?
public hearing on the 10th of September,
Next
the way
Monday.
I understand
Okay.
it.
All right.
And then this would come to city council to approve the TIF district
Okay.
on the 24th of September.
Well, somebody famous once said, it might have been Bessie, it might have been Jerry, I don't know. Change happens at the speed of trust, and trust has to be earned. We want to change how the downtown looks and its appeal to businesses. The TIF plan was an effort to do that. If this were just to go forward, can we trust that the council would not take action until this JRB could meet and work this through? Because we're all assuming the council's just gonna vote it up or down, and we're done. I don't think that's a reliable assumption. Wouldn't the council listen to the JRB? I know you're not the whole council, you're just leader.
I'm only the mayor, but would I listen to this JRB? You better believe it. I mean, that's where I started this meeting, Bill. Honesty, candor, forthrightness, that's what we need to do. And what I understand is that if Cindy's motion passes, and it appears that it does have support here, is that what we will be asked to do as a joint review board is to have another meeting around your roundtable, as you suggest, and we talk about this. What I'm concerned about is I see the momentum of some of the projects that have been talked about in the TIF 3, and this is really exciting stuff. So, but I guess what I would ask JoEllen and Jason, you're our TIF experts, if we pass Cindy's motion to remove those two, is that you're asking, you remove these two? Or do you
Well-
want simply
It's more
discussion
complicated.
about removing those?
Well, that's a discussion, but the motion really is to not vote for the TIF, and we need to sit down with, and further
Oh, okay.
negotiate an agreement.
So you're simply asking for us
To delay,
have
basically.
further discussion?
Right.
Is that gonna put TIF 3 in jeopardy?
If the joint review board makes a negative recommendation by statute, the city has 30 days to continue working with the joint review board. It doesn't affect the timeline for the public hearing on September 10th, but the city would be able to continue working with the joint review board and talking through various options.
Would we want to meet prior to we can't meet prior to September 10th.
Those, by statute, it specifically says those timelines are independent of each other, so the city could have the public hearing and solicit public feedback on TIF 3 in that venue, while still continuing discussions with the joint review board.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'm just a little, I hear a lot of words about collaboration being used, but, you know, here we recessed the meeting, and as far as I can tell, none of that's happened. So I would like to just be clear for the purposes behind the reason that we keep continuing it. Is it to have a conversation about TIF 3, or is it to have a conversation about, as you mentioned, sort of TIF adjacent issues or prior TIF issues that favorable, agreements have not yet been reached by certain taxing districts? Because there's been no inclusive discussion. There's been no, I feel like we're all talking about things without talking about things, and we're not getting anywhere. And it's, how long do we intend to continue the conversation by suggesting that what we really want to do is ensure that the public funds are being utilized, when really what we're discussing is making sure that we each individually are getting what we want out of a deal. Those are two very different things.
There's a lot of issues here. I think you hit it on the head, Jen. Why don't we take control? We're the JRB. Why don't we just determine that we're gonna set the time and the place, and we'll have a meeting, and we'll meet all the, whatever statutes may apply to that, and those people who have technical information, who they think would be interesting or useful to us, should attend.
And I agree. I mean, the whole process here is to be transparent. And I know, again, I know the Joint Review Board is pretty much perfunctory. I mean, really, I don't even feel like we have really a voice, or have in the past. I've been to the meetings before, and it really was just it's just stamping a box. It's just checking things off. So I think this is a really important process that we need to get started and really make this a committee or a board that really does something and actually has some input into these TIFs. And they've been around for a long time, and again, I go back to, I know it's just specific to TIF 3, but how can you talk about TIF 3 and not talk about TIFs 1 and 2? Especially if we're looking at porting those funds as well, and really having an understanding. When I read through the redevelopment plan, there is nothing in that plan that mentions anything about porting funds or using surpluses from the other TIFs, which I found pretty surprising, unless I completely missed it, but I did spend a lot of time looking at it and tried to find that, but it really doesn't even mention that in there. So if someone's reading that, they would not even know that that was a possibility unless they're coming to the city council meetings or really delving into the detail. So I think those are really important aspects that really need to be put out on the table and discussed.
My primary concern is that we meet again in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. We talk about the same thing. We don't get anywhere, I thought the reason for our JRB was to look at what our experts, Friedman, said, and that we can move forward with this concept plan. What I'm hearing today doesn't necessarily tell me that that is the case. We do have a motion on the floor.
Can I mention something?
Yes, Tim.
Can we amend the motion to include a date when we're gonna meet again, instead of just postpone it?
The actual motion on the floor would be essentially a negative recommendation of the plan. So if if the JRB would want to meet again, we would either need to have the motion withdrawn and another motion made for continuing the meeting. Correct, Gene?
I think if the board passes, so the motion on the floor was to recommend rejection of the plan for a myriad of reasons. If the board passes that motion, the board could make a subsequent motion to set another joint review board meeting to follow the statutory procedure for meeting and conferring with the city to discuss the process as it moves forward. So again, just to put everybody on the, try and put everybody on a level playing field. If the board recommends rejection of the matters before it, the municipality will have 30 days within which to resubmit the plan or amendment. During this period, the municipality will meet and confer with the board and attempt to resolve those issues set forth in the board's written report. It goes on to say it's an independent timeline from the public hearing, but there's not a reason to answer your specific question. If this motion passed, the board could make a motion following it to set another meeting date. That is a possibility.
Wouldn't the components, though, excuse me, wouldn't the components of the public hearing be totally different? If what I hear, the real intent of this motion being to possibly remove those two projects out of the plan, we're gonna be talking about that on September 10th, are we not? So what the JRB could come back and we could be voting on something totally different as a TIF 3.
The
Do you
way
understand my question, or?
I do. The way the statute works, it contemplates the potential that those are happening kind of on two separate tracks. And the public hearing could be another opportunity to solicit public feedback. If that's one of the open points of discussion, it could be another opportunity to solicit public feedback on that question.
Okay.
Wouldn't we be in the exact same position that we were in 2 weeks ago if we try to meet again? And would it not also trigger OMA considerations and all of the things that prevented us from meeting between last time and this time? I fail to see how continuing further is we'll just be in the exact same spot, except for now we've really significantly, messed the timeline laid out.
Didn't we recess last time, and that was one of the problems? But if we actually are adjourning this meeting, we certainly could call another meeting with all the proper notifications and public invited. But I thought the recess was the issue that made it difficult to have a meeting in between.
I was under the impression that there was an intent to work things out between the taxing districts that had the complaints.
In the last month.
In the last month, without, that we were, there was concern that people would be embarrassed, and there was no need for that, so we can just work these things out. And that was the intent, was that we would recess, work, whatever needed to be worked out would be worked out by the time we get here. And so my impression was that there was no need to discuss it then, because it could all be sorted out. So now here we all are back, and we're in the, as far as I can tell, nothing has altered at all. And I completely agree that more discussion should be had on some of these things. But again, going back to the statutory scope of what the JRB is intended to do, we can have those conversations without being convened as a JRB, which triggers all kinds of public considerations. I think to Ms. Cranapple' point that we've had lengthy discussion about, it is not to halt those conversations from happening, but rather to have them in a way that are collaborative discussions between the taxing bodies, not under the purview of the JRB. That's where I think we're having a little hiccup, is we keep trying to fit all these discussions that people feel should be happening, and rightfully so, and squeeze it in to the JRB's job. And I think what I heard you saying earlier was that there's a reason why those definitions exist in a narrow scope, and it's so that we could address the specific charge of the JRB, is my impression.
Mayor,
Yeah.
there is nothing that will hurt the TIF if this board meets again to discuss the details. Because after all, you did not get the information, staff, until the 11th hour. So you really have not had enough time to digest and to really sit down and talk. Nothing is going to be hurt by doing that discussing. And you have to set the timetable. You need to set that timetable. and not allow anybody else to set it for you. This is a
I don't know
perfect
what additional
opportunity.
information at the 11th hour we're talking about.
When did any of the information that the questions that have come up, when did you get any of the information about anything? About what the mayor outlined? Did you get any information? No.
Well, no, we've had the TIF
But that
3
has
plan.
nothing, that has nothing to do with what the
It won't
JRB
take, it
is
won't hurt
mandated
if
to
you
do.
meet again to talk specifically about some of the points that have been brought up. That's not gonna hurt anything. It's just a little bit of a delay, and you'll also have the public hearing input. It's not gonna hurt anything. It's not gonna hurt it. There's no reason to muddy the waters. There's no reason why you can't meet again a couple more times so you can iron out some things and really work together as a unit.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor, may I speak for a second?
Yes, please, Bob.
My brother has a saying, and he's very savvy. He says that when the bureaucracy has so many restrictions that it fails, then government fails at its mission. And it really boggles my mind that the and I guess I'm talking because I don't really know what two parcels you're talking about, but when the two parcels are the parcels that started off the great momentum for this big push downtown, which I think they are, I might be mistaken, those two parcels have generated huge amounts of government momentum, personal momentum, building momentum, and if those two parcels are what's causing this new generation of economic development to stop in its tracks because of emotion, to me, Cornerstone doesn't seem to be blighted. So if the basic fundamentals are it must be a blighted property, and we've talked about, I don't agree the word should be blighted, but that's the statutory requirements. They're gonna need investment, that's the blight. If Cornerstone is not blighted, and those are the two parcels, or the other one down the block, if that's the problem, they're not blighted. I don't see how they fit into the reallocation of TIF 3 funding. What I see here, we spent millions of dollars to start that ball rolling, and it really is rolling through downtown. If you go and look around, you'll see it's not only economic momentum and building momentum, it's psychological momentum. It's the psychographics of what we're doing here. And that's what's gonna happen. Because to me, it seems like we started a 4-lap race here. It's a 1-mile race, quarter-mile laps, all right? And these people have started it off, and downtown business holders and the government has helped, but it's like we started this race, they're moving along, they're in this half-mile mark, and all of a sudden now we're saying, nah, you know, we got a procedural problem, stop, come back to the starting point, and you know, everything will be fine, we'll just go over it again and air out these little difficulties. The problem with that is, Mr. Mayor, and we just talked about this, we are destroying momentum, all right, which we spent greatly. Every dollar of government investment is hard-earned by all taxpayers. If we stop this ball right now because of some petty bickering, and I mean this, the whole group, not just this board, we're destroying the momentum we spent gravely to produce. And I know for a fact that economic development is working very hard. We've had many meetings with them, the whole group. And I know that everybody's waiting for this to happen so that we can continue the path of economic development. So, you know, I see these I'm also a lawyer. I see these procedural requirements, but it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse, and we have to move on with TIF 3. TIF 1 and TIF 2 are over. Maybe the years are still up, but if the government has made mistakes in the past, all right, it wasn't this group and it wasn't this board. So let's not destroy everything because in the past a few people made some mistakes. You know, I don't know what the protocol should be, but you can't destroy this momentum. It's not going to keep going. I see Capitol as a river. If you put bricks or blocks or a dam in front of Capitol, the river will flow around it, all right? They'll go to Sycamore. They'll go someplace else. So please, don't stop this train in its tracks now because of a procedural requirement. And I wanted to end with this. Let's say the school district gives up 10%, all right? And that's your valid investment that you're throwing into this TIF district. Well, what's gonna happen when those 10% aren't happening? Because, you know, the town doesn't develop. It just stagnates, all right? You're gonna be losing a lot of future 10%, but you might make some money out of this too. So that's how I look at each individual person's particular interest. And I know we all have to watch out for ourselves, but please, don't stop momentum now.
Bob, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a public hearing coming up. What that public hearing, I would think, the folks who are gonna want and come and talk about that, will be to take a look at this joint review board and what it has done. I cannot support this motion. I will be only one vote. But this motion will stop that momentum. Believe me, it will stop that momentum,
Mayor, can
in
I
my
make a
opinion. Yes, Tim.
clarification too? According to the expert report that we heard the last time, each building in the TIF district doesn't have to be blighted. It's a percentage of the overall. So according to the statute, including those two buildings doesn't invalidate the validity of that, of approving that with those buildings in it. It's not because it's blighted.
Right.
Right.
Well, I stand corrected.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the goal is common with everybody. So I'd like to lay out a plan to kind of get us there so we don't kind of keep going in circles here if possible. I think the act, you have your public hearing set for September 10th. After the public hearing, the law says you have 14 days after the public hearing or not more than 90 to adopt the TIF. You guys have this scheduled to be adopted on the short end of that goal, which is 24 days. This goes towards what Bill was saying, which is who's to say you're gonna vote on it immediately? And I don't know who controls the agenda in DeKalb. I don't know, Mayor, if that's you or any board member. I guess a couple board members can put it on there. But there's 14 to 90 days after the public hearing, at which point the city can adopt it. So there's time there. If for whatever reason you didn't want to vote it down today and then restart the process with the new plan like within 30 days and still pass a TIF because it doesn't kill your TIF, we have time even after today's date to get in front of this within that 90-day period to hopefully meet and talk about it. What we're missing though is there is a September 10th public hearing. And how the school board at least, and I'd have to talk to my client some more, but how they, what they present at that public hearing could kill momentum or it could be positive for momentum. Unfortunately, the date's coming upon us and we don't control that because it seems like the city's unwilling to alter its artificial deadline, which its artificial deadline is we have to do it today and we have to have the public hearing on September 10th and we have to pass it on the 24th, when the reality is you don't have to do it today and you can pass it anytime you want. After it votes down today and come back and take another shot at it and pass it anytime before the end of the year or even by the end of February. As for why we didn't meet in the last 30 days, we were meeting. I agree, we should just do them in open meeting. I have no problem doing them in open public. I was trying to be more efficient in meeting with Dean. We've had a lot of discussions. Some of them just have taken longer. These complicated topics. These aren't topics that can get resolved in 15 or 20 days when you're calling the Department of Revenue and you're discussing on some of the surplus distributions with regard to sales tax, and it's not regarding the general administrative transfers, but it's another component and another issue that it just takes time to figure out. So my goal is this. So on the board is a vote to vote this down. That's kind of the motion today. If you vote it down, we'll have 30 days to kind of meet and we'll have more public meetings and we'll discuss kind of the issues and what we really want to see happen.
Actually,
go forward.
if we support the motion.
If you support the motion,
Yes,
if you
you
support
said
the
if we
motion to
voted
vote, excuse me, yes, thank you. If you support, it's only a mayor can catch that. I know it gets confusing for the motions to vote down.
Okay.
Then we'll have, as Dean said, 30 days to come up with an alternative plan or to reach agreement on that. And yes, that'll include some discussions that are outside the purview of TIF 3, but we're not going to get around those discussions. Whether those discussions are here, whether those discussions are part of the public hearing, whether they're just in the public domain not following this meeting, the creation of the TIF, we're going to have those discussions one way or the other. If you vote for it, and a non-vote is a vote for it, then council's gonna move forward, and I would hope, Mayor, that you'd commit to pushing the vote to approve the TIF outside of that 14 to 90-day window after the public hearing. Would you agree to commit to that if everybody continues to talk
I
and
don't
meet?
understand totally what you're talking about, Gino,
So, just to be clear, you have a public hearing set on September 10th. The city council has 14 to 90 days after that September 10th date to vote on the creation of the new TIF. So you don't have to bring that to your board on September 24th. That's currently the date you have scheduled for that vote to create the TIF, September 24th. You have 14 to 90 days. So you have as many as 90 days from September 10th to pass that TIF. So if we're talking about having an opportunity to all work together and try to reach common resolution, would you be willing to support pushing that vote off from your council to
Mayor?
the latter end of that?
Mayor, may I interrupt? I understand what Gino Galuzzo is talking about. We can bring back the creation of the new TIF later than September 24th to City Council for approval. So we can hold off bringing it on the 24th. But I think that would be a bigger discussion for us at the city, but we can bring it later. The original plan was put into place when we started talking with all the taxing districts all the way back in November. And so the time frame that that's built around started then when Jason really took the lion's share of the effort to go out and meet with all the taxing districts, discuss everything that is now in question today with the porting and the properties. We've been very transparent with that information. So the timeline that you have in front of you is the timeline that was put together quite a while back that we've been discussing with the taxing districts. Yes, we can push it back from the 24th. That is a potential, and that's something we can work forward with, but the September 10th public hearing is the one that we will keep the date in place.
I guess that answers your question.
Part one of the question. Part two of the question was, given that, as I said earlier, how we come out in the public hearing could be different depending on how our discussions go and how our discussions go with regard to how we're moving forward. I would ask that in your September 10th public hearing, you also, instead of ending the meeting on that date, you recess it to another date a few weeks down the road so that we could have an opportunity to come in to speak either for or against the TIF at that time, so we can refrain to speak for or against it on September 10th. I think that would be premature if we had to speak on it before we had an opportunity to air kind of all our issues among this group in order to reach a resolution.
You and Dean have been talking so much over the past couple of weeks. Does that make sense to you, what he just said?
I think the school board has their meeting tonight, and Mr. Galuzzo is going to have an opportunity to get some feedback from the school board with respect to what you had outlined earlier and what he and I have been talking about. I think we can certainly evaluate where we're at on the 10th and see what the needs are with respect to completing or not completing the public hearing at that time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Been moved and seconded. Do you have the motion written down, Jason?
I have a copy here.
Please don't read the whole thing, but just
Okay.
basically, what is your motion?
Basically to vote to, let's see, we feel that the redevelopment plan failed to meet the objectives of the act, and the recommendation is to reject the designation of the redevelopment plan and adoption of the redevelopment plan at this point, and then we want to assemble the taxing bodies to undertake further discussion and negotiation regarding an amended plan.
Okay, it was moved there. You seconded, Heather? You still second it? Okay.
To clarify, if you disagree with that,
I disagree with that.
No, I'm
You
just
vote no.
saying, if you vote no and you're effectively lending your support to the TIF as is.
That is correct.
Okay.
Is there any chance I could talk before you close out?
Sure, Glenn.
My brother paraphrased a little. What I say is, when bureaucracy defeats the purpose for which the system was intended, we have failed. Okay? I know you all know what that means. First of all, everyone benefits. You represent all these different areas of DeKalb, but everyone benefits from a strong downtown. Going back to what I just said from my personal quote, common sense tells me, now maybe it's not written in the rules of law, but common sense tells me, because I don't know which these two parcels are either. But if they are what maybe my brother said they were, common sense tells me if you just gave $3 or $4 million of TIF money to a specific project, I don't think it would be the best interest of anyone to give more money to that same project. Especially when you've got all these other areas. I don't like the word Blythe either. Everybody just walk through downtown DeKalb, see the progress, and see the failures. You guys, the people you represent, truly can and will make a difference. It really is that simple. Now, I knew nothing about the 10 or 11 million dollars going from TIF 1 and 2 to TIF 3. Is that the only place that 10 or 11 million dollars can go? Does it have to go forward into the new TIF plan? Maybe there's some better use for the money. And I ask that because I didn't understand that part at all.
Okay.
So please think about these issues. This is the future. The glass is more than half empty for me. This is the future of tomorrow, not what's happened in the past. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, we have a motion on the floor, and a second. A vote for this motion will delay the process, will be a vote against TIF, moving forward on TIF 3. I cannot support that motion, but again, I am only one vote representing the city of DeKalb. Any further comment?
I just have to clarify your statement. This does not slow down the process. The process will remain the same. It's just what our stand is on reading the issue.
Okay.
And I also think, to clarify, it does not indicate that we don't support the TIF. As the taxing bodies who are helping to support the TIF itself, we would just like some additional discussions around it.
My point is, Heather, that city's recommendation and motion strips considerable strength out of this proposal going forward, TIF 3, okay? In my opinion. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Hayes.
No.
Ms. Johnson?
No.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Mayor Smith?
No.
Mr. Nicholas?
No.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Hanson?
Yes.
Motion fails.
Motion fails.
Motion failed.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I have another motion.
Yes.
Shorter motion. I move that the JRB meet as soon as practical to A, review amendments to the proposed redevelopment plan with respect to certain parcels, and B, to review the distribution of the surplus from TIF 1, TIF 2, and the proposed TIF 3.
Second.
Okay, and what is that going to enable us to do, Bill?
Well, it seems that we have a couple of large areas of disagreement or lack of compromise. And one is the distribution of the surplus, which is different from the proposed redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan's biggest issues, it seems to me, without taking one side or another, is several parcels. I like to see the numbers. I like to see how it would play out if they're in or if they're out. And I've not had that. I guess I've had it if they're in because we see that in the proposed plan, but I'd like to see what it's like if they're out. That's arithmetic. That's pretty easy to do. And then on the distribution, again, it's arithmetic. It's not rocket science. So we should be able to see that, and anybody who's interested in this topic should be able to see that. Nice, clean charts, not 20 pages. Okay?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded.
Wait, now I need clarification though. How does that impact does that effectively have the same
This gets back to my
problem
point
with the
about
town?
trust. I would think the council would want to hear from the JRB before they take a vote.
Okay.
I think it would be unconscionable for the council to take a vote without the JRB making a affirmative, one way or another, an affirmative vote. We like this plan or we like this plan, not that we don't like any plan.
Any further discussion? Does that motion, it simply says you want more information before the JRB can
I
vote?
think we all need that, and I think we need to talk together.
Okay. Roll call.
Sorry, 1 second.
Want me to repeat it?
No, no.
Nope. Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mayor Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Nicholas,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
and Mr. Hanson.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Would it be counterproductive then to entertain a motion that we approve the concept of TIF 3?
I think it wouldn't be possible based on the last
Okay,
vote.
Yes.
okay. That's why I asked the question, counterproductive. Okay?
I think our next question would be when
When?
the joint review board would want to get together. And I think Mr. Nicholas's point is apt on doing that sooner rather than later.
Bring in the food, we can meet at 6.
Not today, we can.
All right, we can't do that.
We have a wonderful project down on the river tonight, opening that bike path. That-
Why don't we linger and compare schedules?
Okay. Any further, yes, Dean?
I hate to be your resident OMA stickler, but if you're intending on meeting, for example, Wednesday or Thursday in the next 48 hours, we would need to determine that now so that we could continue to that time instead of having to wait 48 hours to post.
So,
Do we want to meet yet this week?
Yeah,
Schedule-
I suppose it depends on when.
I think we should try.
So
Yeah,
the-
I agree.
The earliest we could meet then, Dean, would be what in terms of following the
how about Friday?
Friday? Yeah.
Yeah, if we're continuing to a date and time certain, you could meet anytime. You could meet tomorrow if you wanted.
Okay.
If you're reposting as a new meeting, then it would be 48 hours. But
Oh, I see. So if we continue this meeting, we can meet tomorrow.
yes,
If we schedule a new meeting, we'd have to go by that 60,
the 48 hour.
48 hours. Okay. So I guess we want to simply continue the meeting, even if the meeting is to tomorrow or Friday.
I would ask to go till Friday, if possible.
Friday would work for me.
Yes.
Okay. Bill, you've made a motion then to move the meeting to Friday?
Yes. What time?
Here, okay?
What time are we meeting?
Same time? 3
Three.
o'clock?
Can we meet earlier? Can we do 1 o'clock?
And need a round table, yes. 1 o'clock, Gary?
Okay,
Is that possible?
Is that okay? 1 o'clock here?
So we would request a motion to continue the meeting to Friday, September 7th at 1 PM at DeKalb City Hall, City Council Chambers.
Before that's a motion, if we would adjourn this meeting and go through the open meetings notification, it would make that word to everybody in the public, as opposed to only us knowing about that.
And it would, I'm sorry, Mr. Hanson, it would certainly be our intention to put out an amended agenda and get the date and time on it, and we'd put that out today still.
Okay, was there any reason to recess as opposed to,
If we're going out 48 hours, no, other than this body firmly setting when you wish to meet.
If we meet at 1, it wouldn't be technically 48 hours, would it?
On Friday, by Friday it would.
We could post.
So I
an
think we
agenda
wanted to
tomorrow.
is to continue this meeting
Oh, yeah.
until Friday at 1 o'clock. Is that okay in your motion, Bill?
Yes.
Second? Who seconded that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, Cindy seconded. Roll call?
Is it is it Bill's motion and?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mayor Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Nicholas,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Hanson.
yes?
All in favor?
We will meet again then on Friday, right here, 1 o'clock. Need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Who said that?
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.